Imagine this. It's the final, desperate days of World War II. The German army is collapsing, and soldiers are starving, scrounging for anything they can find. Then, they capture some American soldiers, and, along with them, their supplies. They get their hands on something called a K-Ration, the standard American combat meal. They tear it open, expecting some basic, grim military food. But what they find inside shocks them to the core. It's not just food. It's a feast compared to what they have. And in that moment, seeing the contents of a simple American meal pack, many German officers knew, with absolute certainty, that the war was already lost. How could a simple box of food deliver such a devastating psychological blow? Let's unpack the story. To understand their shock, we need to look at what the German soldiers were eating, or rather, not eating. By late 1944, the German war machine was sputtering. Supply lines were shattered by Allied bombing. The once mighty Wehrmacht was now a shadow of its former self, filled with old men and young boys. Their daily ration, if they got one, was often just a piece of hard, black bread and some thin, watery soup, maybe a sliver of sausage if they were lucky. They were constantly hungry, weak, and demoralized. Food was a relentless, gnawing obsession. For them, survival was a daily struggle against starvation. Now, picture a German officer, gaunt and hungry, opening a captured American K-Ration. The first thing he notices is the packaging. It's waxed, waterproof, and professionally sealed. Inside, everything is neatly packed. He pulls out a small tin of processed cheese, a can of chopped ham and eggs, and several biscuits. But that's not all. There are also 4 cigarettes, a pack of chewing gum, a tube of bouillon paste to make soup, a packet of instant coffee, and sugar cubes. There's even a small roll of toilet paper and a wooden spoon. It wasn't just a meal. It was a complete kit designed for a soldier's comfort and morale. The contrast was staggering. While German soldiers were fighting on empty stomachs, the Americans were not only well-fed but were also given luxuries like coffee, sugar, and cigarettes. Think about the industrial power required to produce and distribute millions of these kits. Each component, from the canned meat to the individually wrapped sugar cubes, represented a level of mass production and logistical capability that Germany could no longer even dream of. The bouillon paste alone was a luxury. The instant coffee was a miracle of modern food science. The chewing gum was seen as a purely American indulgence. One German officer, captured in the Battle of the Bulge, famously recounted his experience. He said that when he saw the K-Ration, he didn't see food. He saw factories that were still running, supply chains that were unbroken, and a country so rich and powerful it could afford to give its soldiers not just sustenance, but comfort items. He realized Germany wasn't just fighting an army. They were fighting an entire industrial civilization that was operating on a completely different level. The war was no longer about tactics or fighting spirit. It had become a war of production, and America was outproducing Germany on an unimaginable scale. The K-Ration was the brainchild of a physiologist named Keys. Yes, the same guy who later became famous for his studies on diet and health. In 1941, the U.S. Army asked him to design a non-perishable, ready-to-eat meal that could fit in a soldier's pocket. The goal was to provide about 2,800 to 3,000 calories a day to keep a soldier fighting. Keys and his team tested various food combinations on soldiers, who they call their guinea pigs. They settled on a system of 3 distinct meals: breakfast, dinner, and supper, each in its own color-coded box. The breakfast unit, for example, typically had the canned meat, biscuits, and coffee. The dinner unit might have the cheese and biscuits, while the supper unit had a different kind of canned meat. This system was brilliant. It provided variety and a balanced nutritional profile. But more importantly, it was a morale booster. Getting a small luxury like a cigarette or a piece of candy in the middle of a brutal firefight could make a world of difference. It was a small taste of home, a reminder of the civilization they were fighting for. It told the American GI that his country cared about him, not just as a cog in the war machine, but as an individual. This stood in stark contrast to the German High Command's approach, which, by the end, treated its soldiers as completely expendable. The psychological impact on the Germans was profound. They saw the K-Ratians as a symbol of America's seemingly infinite resources. It wasn't just about the food itself, but what it represented. If the average American soldier was this well equipped, what about their tanks, their planes, their ships? The sheer material wealth of the United States was laid bare in that small cardboard box. It was a tangible, edible piece of evidence that Germany could never win. They were being crushed, not just by bombs and bullets, but by an avalanche of canned ham, instant coffee, and chewing gum. The stories from the front lines are telling. German prisoners of war were often amazed by the amount of food the Americans had. Some accounts describe German soldiers surrendering just to get a meal. When they were given K-Rations, they would often hoard them, disbelieving that such food could be so plentiful. For them, it was like treasure. This stark difference in provisions created a deep sense of hopelessness. How can you continue to fight when you know your enemy is so much better supplied, better fed, and better cared for? Even the packaging of the K-Ration was a marvel of engineering. It was designed by the Crackerjack Company, believe it or not. The box was sturdy and waterproofed with a synthetic resin, which was a brand new technology at the time. This meant the food stayed safe and edible in the mud of France, the jungles of the Pacific, or the frozen forests of the Ardennes. Germany, on the other hand, was struggling to even find enough metal for its ammunition cans, let alone for high-quality food packaging. Every detail of the K-Ration screamed industrial superiority. So, when that German officer opened that American meal pack, he wasn't just seeing a soldier's lunch. He was looking at a microcosm of the American economy. He saw the efficiency of its farms, the innovation of its scientists, the power of its factories, and the reach of its logistics. He saw a nation that could project its power not just with weapons, but with the simple, overwhelming abundance of its resources. The K-Ration was, in its own way, as powerful a weapon as a Sherman tank or a B-17 bomber. It attacked the enemy's will to fight. It was a declaration of industrial might that said, loud and clear, you cannot win. And for many who saw it, that message was undeniable. They understood, in that moment, that the war was over. It's a fascinating perspective on the war, isn't it? That the turning point, for some, wasn't a major battle, but the simple act of opening a box of food. It goes to show that wars are won not just on the battlefield, but on the home front, in the factories, and in the minds of the soldiers. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden histories. See you in the next one.